Welcome to the devotional series, A Psalm a Day Keeps Satan Away and Pondering the Parables, a special podcast edition subtitled, Can't We All Just Get Along? And I'm Pastor Dewak. Well, we are just 1 week removed from the Super Bowl and the controversial halftime performance put on by Bad Bunny, and I would say the equally controversial alternative halftime show produced by Kid Rock. This situation, this event being just the latest in what seems like an endless line of events that seem to pit our country against each other. I just, off the top of my head, wrote down some of the items that have occurred, the events that have occurred in the last several years in no particular order. In the post-COVID years, we had the vax-anti-vax division. In the aftermath of the George Floyd death in 2020, we had severe race riots across the country. January 6th of 2021, the uprising certainly created incredible division in our country. There have been anti-Israeli protests and riots going back to October 7th of 2023, and they continue pretty much to this day. And of course, most recently, the immigration crisis that seems to have captivated everybody's attention and where everybody has picked a side and dug in the trenches. This is not new in our country. This idea of division that is, by the way, stirred up by the mainstream media and the alternative media outlets, fomenting this anger and this emotion and the divisions that do exist in our country. They really go back to the beginning of our nation's birth. I was thinking about one of the most famous ones. It's that famous duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton at the very beginning of our country's existence. They were political rivals and also personal rivals. They pretty much hated each other's guts. And so there was a challenge to a duel. Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. The result of that was the ultimate in canceling culture, with Alexander Hamilton dying as a result of the wounds he received in the duel. But interestingly enough, that's the ultimate cancel culture. But Aaron Burr, after this event, his political career was ruined. Kind of gives us a really good life lesson that cancel culture is not something that's going to ultimately be good for anybody. So that's the secular world. These kind of divisions have pitted us against each other in our country since the beginning. But I'm mostly concerned here with this podcast devotional today with the faith community and the church. The church is not immune to cancel culture. The church is not immune to divisions in not just the universal church, the institutional church, but also between individuals. And that's where I really wanted to focus on today. About 10 years ago, I created, for lack of a better term, a manifesto, a methodology whereby two faith-believing people, two believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, how they could civilly interact with each other and not cancel each other out. And thereby, in having a relationship that is guided by biblical principles, actually bring glory to God as a witness and a testimony to all that's good about him by expressing differences and yet still, when the time comes, embracing each other arm in arm and worshiping the one true God. So I'm going to try to share my screen here today. This will be a dive into a different aspect of technology here with the software that I'm using to record this. And hopefully it'll work. And hopefully you'll be able to see, again, this for lack of a better term, this manifesto. So bear with me. And hopefully you can see this. This is the DWOC rules of engagement within the faith community when there is division, when there is relationship crisis. So the first one, and by the way, there are 7 principles, 7 to-dos here, and that's on purpose. 7 is, of course, God's number. It's the perfect number. It's the number of completion. So whenever I try to put together these types of to-do lists, I like to use the number 7. So here's the first one. Seek empathy. Everyone has a backstory, and it's our responsibility to know and to honor that backstory. And oh, by the way, empathy is a two-way street. And the biblical reference that I put here is from John chapter 4, verses 1 through 26. Those familiar with the text, this is the text of the woman at the well and her encounter with Jesus. She, of course, being a Samaritan woman, Jesus being a Jew, she being the divorced or widowed spouse of 5 husbands, which, of course, in any culture that is odd and different and strange, and will put you at odds with people. But certainly in first century Israel, that would have been a very odd situation. But during that encounter, it's clear that Jesus honors the woman's backstory. And as they encounter and they start to relate to each other, he brings to her this concept of living water, which of course is through belief in him as the Messiah. And the way that story plays out, the way that story is narrated by John, I think is a beautiful example of empathy and seeing that everyone has a backstory. And no matter what that backstory is, that person is a child of God made in God's image. And we need to honor their backstory and seek to understand it, which leads us to principle and to do number 2, which is to practice extreme hospitality. The Bible is a book of being hospitable, especially to those who maybe disagree with you. The biblical reference here goes back to Genesis chapter 18. This is when Abram and Sarah are in the desert, relaxing during the midday heat, and 3 strangers approach them in the desert. And Abram not only gets up, he leaps up and runs to those 3 strangers and offers them comfort and relief from the heat. In fact, he puts in front of them a huge spread of food, so exorbitant, so hospitable, enough food for dozens and dozens of people, just for these 3 who are strangers in the midst, so to speak. So practicing extreme hospitality, that's a way to engage within the faith community. The next one is a very practical one. Practice the 80-20 rule. In other words, speak less, listen more, ask questions. And I've put 2 biblical references here, one from the New Testament, one from the Old. The first is from James chapter 1, verse 19. It says, "Be quick to listen and slow to speak." And then the really cool one from Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19, which says, "Sin is not absent when words are many. Speak less, listen more, ask questions." The third is focus on common ground. And by the way, there's always common ground, especially in the faith community. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, Yeshua, as the Messiah, that's the ultimate and beautiful common ground that we all have. Everything else pales in comparison. Our faith is in him. Our salvation is through him. Everything else is secondary. To quote Billy Graham once again, it's Jesus Christ plus nothing. The 5th one is build up and affirm rather than tear down and destroy. That means don't label, don't stereotype, and live at peace with others. And the passage that I've quoted here is from Romans 12, verses 17 and 18. Let me read it for you. "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And I'll continue because I think it's also relevant in verse 19. "Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord.'" And then it goes on the contrary. "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. And in doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head." And I want to make a comment about the burning coals on the head. In Jewish tradition, burning coals is a symbol for God's presence. So when you heap burning coals on your enemy's head because you fed them and given them something to drink and not taking revenge, you're actually bringing the presence of God to your enemy. And at the end of the day, friends, that is our mission here on this earth, to bring a witness and a testimony to all that is good about God, to those who even might hate us. Number 6, seek to reflect God's character. And in our words and our actions. We are priests of the Most High God. And I quoted a verse here from Exodus chapter 19. And while I'm looking that up, I'll make this comment about priests. The biblical concept of a priest, especially as you read through the book of Exodus, where there is so much detail given as to what the priest is supposed to wear with these special clothes and this white linens and jewels all embedded in the linen. It's a reflection as best in human terms possible of what God could possibly look like. In other words, a priest is not someone that's going to mediate between us and God. A priest is actually a reflection of God to us to give us guidance of who God is. And that is what Exodus chapter 19, verse 6 is exhorting us to do. So this is at Mount Sinai. It was time for the people to head out. They'd been at Mount Sinai for a while. And this is what God says to his people through Moses. Now, if you fully obey me and keep my covenant, then out of all of the nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you, people of Israel, you, people of God, will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nations. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. We are to be a kingdom of priests, reflecting God's character on everybody to whom we come in contact with. And then the last one, number 7, and this brings us full circle back to number 1, in my opinion. Practice Jesus' rule of forgiveness, 70 times 70. And that's from Matthew 18, verses 21 through 22. And again, we recognize the very symbolic use of 70 and 70, or 70 times 70, or 77s. Again, God's perfect number, God's complete number. How often are you to forgive? You're to forgive completely and unendingly. Let me read the passage to you. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus responded, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. This manifesto, this rules of engagement within the faith community came about in my life about 10 years ago in a conflict that I was having with a person, another believer, actually a minister in training. And so this rules of engagement within the faith community came out as a result of that. And I got to number 7, which is practicing the rules of forgiveness. And I realized that no matter how different we would approach just about anything in life here on this earth, we had something in common, and that was faith in Jesus Christ. And it is our responsibility to look past those differences, find the common ground, and be a witness and a testimony for all that's good about God. And so that's the exhortation here today. When the next crisis comes, when the next made-for-TV division comes in our culture, reflect about how you are going to respond in love, even if those people seem to be your enemies, especially if they're other people of faith. Because cancel culture is bad enough in the secular world. It's even worse if you try to attempt that in the faith community. People are watching. The secular world is watching. Do the right thing. Practice the rules of engagement within the faith community, and God will be glorified. Godspeed and shalom. Pastor D. Walk signing out.